If people are respectfully allowed to think, grow, and contribute with their individual abilities, we will learn much faster about the unseen truths that surround us each day. By letting people create their own maps, we will build momentum for discovery and achieve more profound insight and understanding. Michael Macmillan. On that note, I'll first request Ms. Divya from the Department of Commerce to give the profile of our very special speaker today. Dr. S. Charan Singh, professor at IIMB and advisor to RBI. He obtained his MPhil from Jawaharlal Nehru University and PhD from University of New South Wales. He was a research professor till 1990. He was assistant advisor from 1990 till 1997 and director till 2009 at RBI. He was senior economist at IMF from 2009 till 2012. He was a visiting fellow at Harvard University and Stanford University. His research papers were published in journals like Pragya and many more. He is a consultant from IMF, where current projects are on fiscal policy, debt management, and many others. Professor Singh's research areas include monetary, fiscal, debt management, international reserves, financial markets, banking, and infrastructure. His research is published in journals like the Economic and Political Weekly, Pragya RBI Occasional Papers, Indian Journal of Economics and Business, Yojana, etc. His specializations in monetary, fiscal, debt management, international reserves, financial markets, banking, and infrastructure. His research publications include working papers in the area of banking, inflation, demographics, etc., and has also contributed chapters in the following books. Public Debt Management in India, which is co-authored in Guidelines in Public Debt Management, accompanying document, IMF, Washington, June 2002. Financial Sector Reforms in India, in Oxford Companion to Economics in India, Oxford University Press, editor, Kaushik Basu, 2006. Comment on Global Demography, Fact, Force and Future by Bloom, David and D. Canny. He has consistently contributed articles to the Financial Express, the Hindu, Business Line, the Tribune, the Indian Express, the New Indian Express, Deccan Chronicle, Business Today, and Business Standard, etc. I'm compelled to state on a personal note that that brief profile does not do justice to the very long career and the amazing amount of work that Sir has done. And I request Subramaniam Sir to welcome him with a bouquet. May I now request Dr. Charan Singh to take over and deliver the special address for the day.
Good afternoon, everybody. Keeping everybody awake after lunch is the biggest challenge as a professor I face every day. I hope this is a meeting of the professors and they'll stay awake on their own. At the outset, I should thank my dear friend, my old colleague, we call him Subbu, for having thought of me and inviting me over. It was my first visit to Jain University, and I'm really mesmerized with what I'm seeing here and the people that I've met here. So thanks for inviting me over, and thanks to the hosts who are doing this for organizing this excellent conference on a topic on which I started writing about 20 years ago. And that point of time, everybody was talking to, I used to be at the Reserve Bank of India, and I used to tell them that demographic is a big thing. We need to think of aging population, we need to think of young population. And they said, what are you talking of? What population? And it was not the currency, this was not a big buzzword. But I'm so happy that over the years this topic became important. And then now we are having series of such discussions across the country on both accounts. Aging population, that brings in social security concerns, and the increasing number of working population, how are we going to use them and deploy them That is the second aspect, which is happening very soon. About 15 to 20 years from now, we'll have to take up the third aspect, the shrinking school education, school population. So that will come little later, but at this point, the aging and the working age population. So what I'm going to do is, I wasn't very sure what is the audience, and therefore I've pitched my presentation at a mixture of students and some faculty. So I do not know if this seems too very preliminary for you. I'll seek forgiveness if you find it too preliminary, but knowing now after coming here that this was the faculty across the country, I'll try to give you stories which you can carry home and probably benefit your students too. So let me start with a small picture here, which I say India of today, an elephant with a dream to fly, but we all know however hard you try, the elephant can't fly. That's our objective, stated repeatedly by our Prime Minister, and that's our status. Now, how do we reach there? We have the capabilities, we have the DNA, we were the richest country of the world for thousands of years. So we have the DNA and we will make it. But the transition is not going to be easy because many things will have to change. So now we all want to grow, you want to grow, the nation wants to grow, we all want to grow. How do we do it? So what are the key conditions for growth? The key condition for growth is macro stability, and the whole Ministry of Finance is working on it. Setting up institutions and maintaining institutions, the Reserve Bank, the SEBI, and they are already there. Opening up the economy, open to ideas, already the country is there. I think the fourth one is education, and I think at this point something which needs far more attention and focus. That's what we are going to spend our time today talking about. Now when we do this growth, there have to be some objectives in mind, and one of it has to be a reduction in poverty, the second reduction in unemployment, and the third reduction in inequality. So I think those are our goals, and these are conditions for growth, and education is something that I'm going to focus on. So here is this demographic and education taking a plunge straight into the whole thing. Size of national income has to grow, but how does everybody benefit? Important for us. Post 1991, nearly quarter of a century is already over. An economic revolution took place. The young minds we have today were not there in 1991. People like me were there. We have attained a much higher economic growth, much higher income now than what we used to be before 1991. I remember Goldman Sachs came out with a study in 2003, and I met both of their authors. One of them was Purushottam. They coined the word BRICS, and for the first time, at least that time, demography and education were related. That was a turning point. For a long time in our country, we thought population is a drag, and we always used to brag about the experience, the experiment which Chinese were doing with one-child policy. Angus Deaton, who got the Nobel Prize recently, came out with a beautiful thought. He said he never understood what was the drag. 2 hands, 2 feet to feed only 1 mouth. Where was the problem? That again changed the whole concept of population as a drag. But when there is a young population as we have now, a couple of things are a cause of concern. Education, how do we have them employable, and their health. These 3 things play a very important role. To enhance productivity in a country, skill development is necessary, and so is education. And we all know of jobless growth, and we also know what Narayan Murthy told us, unemployable graduates. How do we overcome this situation? And to overcome that situation, I think we need 3 things. First, we need greater industry-academia interaction, and it's very fortunate over lunch I realized your university is deep into it. We also need to update our syllabus on a regular basis so we are up to date with the world and what the industry needs. and we need to ensure distributive justice in our own economy. Now here is India's demographic dividend, just to mention some data. We are going to be a very young population very soon. Our average age would be just 29 years by 2020, the youngest. Just look in Europe, people are aging, Japan, people are aging. About 25% of the world's workforce in the next 3 years will be Indians. Just imagine how strong this country would be. And the challenge is 300 million youth will enter the labor force by 2025. Massive challenge that we have. While the world will be suffering from a shortage of young people by 56 million, we would have about 47 million in surplus. That's what we are going to be. But here is a snapshot, a challenge. Recently conducted study in about 17,000 villages in 600 districts across the country. And what it shows us is a decline in arithmetic levels. And the decline is funny, that the percentage of standard 3 children able to solve simple 2-digit subtraction problems is falling. The percentage of standard 2 children who cannot recognize numbers up to 9 has increased, and then there's a stagnant enrollment. Now these are concerns, and this is a challenge. On one hand we talk of demographic dividend, we need to fly, we need to grow, but this is what is happening to our education. Now, as far as status of education in our country is concerned, we have amongst the largest in the world in terms of colleges and universities, and we are growing pretty rapidly. Our colleges and universities are nearly 713 universities, nearly 36,000 colleges, which is a large number, and then just about 11,000 diploma level institutions, which I think is a very small number, needs to be increased. I'm sorry, this is a very small print and I removed those graphs, but you will see some graphs here which will give you a picture. All that I'm trying to show here is the primary, senior secondary, all the institutions have grown rapidly from 1950-51 onwards. That's the data that I was trying to show, and I'm sorry it's a little small here. But here is the trend, and you can see from 50-51 onwards, colleges and universities have been rising rapidly, and they've been rising more rapidly in the last few years. As you can see, this quantum jump which has taken place. Again, these are the recognized educational institutions, and you can see a large number of them we have now as far as school level is concerned, and at the college level, all types of institutions are there. We have nursing, teacher training, all types of technical education, and of course universities and colleges I've already mentioned. So gross enrollment ratios, they are also increasing. Within the last 10 years, you can see they've almost doubling, and number of students enrolled also they are rising. Now this is the gross enrollment ratio, and something good here I see is that the girl child enrollment is higher, 6 to 10 years, and this is the upper primary. Again the girl child is coming up, and that's very good. The data is from 50-51 onwards. And this is the secondary 14 to 15 years, and here I see the girl child is falling back, something really worrisome, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. And this is the secondary 16 to 17 years. The girl child is almost coming up to the boy child, which is something very good. Now this is the little more senior age, and now the gap is emerging very clearly between the girl child and the boy child, and that's the worry. Pupil teacher ratios, I think they're very high. Between here is the plot from primary school to upper primary. I'll show you international data, and that's very different. Now of course one can talk of brick and mortar school and how much can you really build them. There are constraints. As it is, you have schools without teachers, you have schools without walls, you have schools without blackboards. So one has to start thinking of now e-education. I think that's the solution in the years to come. Where are all our children really taking their admissions? Here is the data which shows that quite a bit of them are going into social subjects, humanities, commerce, engineering colleges to some extent, and the postgraduates. Where are the postgraduates going? Most of them are going into management, and they are going to social sciences. So this is how we are absorbing our young people. Now, according to the Labor Bureau report, skilled manpower in our country is just about 2%, which I think is a shame, because when you compare with countries like South Korea and Japan, they are 96% and 80%, and that's really, really high. Of course, some efforts are being made, and now latest data, 6.8% of young people are into some vocational training. I think it's highly inadequate. Now, education expenditure, if you see, about 4.5% of GDP, not much, and I'll do a cross-country comparison and show it to you. Beautiful correlation between youth population and education expenditure. And here literacy rate in India, and the gap, as you can see, is coming down. There's a male and female literacy rate going up from 50-51 onwards. And now here is a cross-country experiment. And you can see from this cross-country experience, India's expenditure on education is far below the countries which we really want to compete with. And I think that needs to be taken into account. If you look up the gross enrollment ratio primary, both genders, again, India is not doing very well, unfortunately. And I think that's where we need to focus on. In contrast, China is doing far better than us. If you look up the enrollment ratio secondary, both genders, once again, India is at the rock bottom. And of course, China is close by, but that's no solace that China is also not doing well as far as gross enrollment is concerned. Now, if you look up the tertiary, again, both genders, again, the same thing that happens, that India is really not doing very well. Okay. Now, pupil teacher ratio, India is amongst the worst. And therefore, I think something needs to be done there. Now, when I do a cross-country study on literacy, India is not doing very well when you compare it with China. Means the country we want to really compete neck to neck with. And therefore, that's a cause of concern. How do we address this issue? And this is again the literacy rate, female population. India is doing worst. So when you look at the projection of working age population, India is going to be at the peak, and that needs to be tapped. But what we have seen as far as education literacy levels are concerned, or expenditure on education is concerned, much remains to be done there. So once again, just to recapitulate what is happening here, our working age population is going to go up. It's going to be nearly 64%, and numbers we are going to be about 870 million. As I already mentioned, our average age would be around 29 years. And the issue is we will be contributing into the workforce between 12 to 15 million people every year. Now, what is the status as far as skill training is concerned? And herein I bring in the story of the MSMEs, which is a sad part that they are not expanding their business. But problem is that of the 11 million students graduating from colleges each year, only 20% get jobs which are relevant to their skill sets. Only 20%. And though women comprise such a large segment of the society, they are only in the range of 21 to 23% of the workforce. The latest data that I was looking at speaks about 27%. Please remember, the rate data for Nepal is above 80%, for China is 70%, for US is around 60%. And if you want to compete, I think letting this part of the workforce not join the workforce is something really that concerning everyone. Now, net enrollment in vocational care courses in India is about 5.5 million per year, compared to 90 million in China and 11 million in the United States. Please remember, United States total population is around 330 million. Ours is around 1.3 billion. Now the country has a total training capacity of just around 4.3 million. That means depriving around 64% entrants of the opportunity of formal skill development. So projected shortfall of 347 million by 22. And if you look up the sectors, where this shortfall is, they are across infrastructure. The requirement is there, we will not be able to meet it. And then there are building and construction all across. Means all across, I need not go through it, but all across there is going to be shortage. So now I want to bring in something related to what I do most of the time. Here is the unorganized and the organized sector, and what I am trying to show you is that 84% people are basically in the unorganized sector. That needs to be taken cognizance of. Now, there is something which we have not thought about in our country, and I want to flag this issue. The issue is about demography and inflation. As you know, there's a trade-off, at least in the short run, between employment and inflation. And countries which have really been doing well as far as workforce is concerned, having high workforce, have to be tolerant to some level of inflation. Now, while we in India are really possessed and say that our inflation should be low, we have to be aware that it does impact growth. So last year, and there is empirical literature on the board which I am showing you from Japan, where they said that their inflation is low because their demographic trend is very, very negative, in the sense that there's huge aging population taking place there in Japan. So last year, with a team of about 10 students, we did a survey across the country, and we wanted to know what is that our country prefers. What do people prefer? So we surveyed across the country in about 6 different cities, and our sample size was 400, and working as well as some housewives, students as well as some elderly people, so across the spectrum. What did we find? Very, very surprising results we found. We asked them, what's your tolerant level of inflation? You'll be surprised. Our median was 13.13. When we pitched it, okay, that's your median or tolerant level of inflation, but all that they preferred was employment. We need employment. Give us a job. And many people whom we interviewed told us that in a country like India, where marriage is very, very important, employment is a precondition to marriage. And therefore, there is a trade-off emerging between inflation and demographic trend. And that needs to be paid cognizance by the policymakers. I was very surprised. Here is the data from 1969 to 2010, and what it does, it simply plots for you youthful population, that is between 15 and 15 to 59, and CPI inflation. You will be surprised to see they have a trend. So if you have a very young population, you have to be more tolerant to little high inflation. And this is Japan. The governor of Japan has repeatedly been saying that my low inflation is because of aging population. So I think Indian policymakers have to take cognizance of this fact. Here is the trend across the world as far as unemployment is concerned. India is not doing too bad. In 2013, of course, as you can see, the world is recovering from one of the great recessions. But then the figures are that we still have a large segment of society which is not, and that's the ILO estimates that I was sharing with you. Here is the unemployment rate among youth according to Indian data, and you can see rural and urban is different. 15 and 19 generally unemployment is high. By 25 to 29 it reaches a different level. People get absorbed. If you look at urban male, same thing emerging. 15 to 19 unemployment is very high. But if you look at urban female, situation is really critical in the next age group 20 to 24, where nearly 1/5 of the women are unemployed. Now this is again adjusted usual status, and we are trying to see what is happening to the unemployment rate 15 to 29 years, and look up the data graduates and above, both males and females. suffer a lot. And this is across rural and urban areas. So the highest level of unemployment is with the literate population. That's a cause of concern, not getting employed. Now I want to bring into your notice a small little story on relevance of the MSME sector. We have the young demographics. We have seen what's happening to literacy levels. We have seen their absorption in the job market. We have seen cross-country experiences. And obviously now the question is, where are we going to get them employed? And then we can decide what level of skill that we need to provide them. So MSME sector, I think, is one of the potential areas which one has to look at. Very, very diverse, 6,000 products, and then employing nearly 11 crore people and contributing nearly 37% to GDP already. So 5 crore MSMEs employing 11 crore people and contributing nearly 37% of GDP. It's a big number, and you would agree with me that probably provides a potential to employ our young demographics. Now what's happening in this? The key constraints that they are facing is lack of managerial competence, and I think that is where we need to pitch in. Lack of managerial competence. Yes, literacy levels are good, education is important, but what our education is going to do, probably we need to build on their managerial competence. Now, how do we do that? Now, I have seen that campuses have not been very, very active to produce entrepreneurs. And I think the reason is the general ecosystem. Many times I wonder, in our country we take pride in IIMs. We should. They are the elite institutions of our country. We do take pride in IITs, and we should. They provide the technological support. But if the country needs entrepreneurs, if the country needs MSMEs, do we really have institutions which are grooming entrepreneurs? Now, managers are managers. They are not entrepreneurs. And that is why you see the limited incubators that we have in our country, 110 of them, and Bangalore has one of the good incubators. Hardly anybody is coming in the incubators. Especially from the own management school, hardly anybody comes into the incubators because we are not producing entrepreneurs. And what I think the potential in the future is MSMEs, but nowhere are we training our entrepreneurs. The other important factor I've just flagged a little time ago is female participation, which is extremely low in India compared to immediate neighbors and global standards. And how do we get them to participate? Even at IIM Bangalore, if you come or go to IIM Ahmedabad, you find very few female students on the campus. So we need to somehow think of ways to encourage female participation, and I think that is where the role of social, political and religious leaders comes, which we cannot ignore. In general, I think we need to recognize now, and the time has come, that India is a big market. And not only we are talking theoretically, but if you look up the newspapers today, yesterday itself, International Monetary Fund has agreed to give a larger role in the board there. Our figures are going up from 2 to nearly 3% now. We are getting recognition that India is a big market. We have to rise up to the occasion and dispense our new responsibilities. So I'm talking of go localization. What do I mean by that? I mean, yes, we have a global market, we have a global presence, but we need to take care of our local situation too. And we need to take that global picture and adjust it to the local conditions. So we have the favorable demographics. Numbers are huge. We have the desire to grow, yes, but where is the action? Now, of course, when you look at the action, as I showed you, our literacy levels are not very high. Schools and colleges are rising not to that extent. And I think if we have to do an action, we have to start thinking in terms of e-education. And that would probably help us break the barriers of physical schools and buildings. Other thing is we lack the fierce competition. Staying ahead of others needs lots of hard work, and one of the easiest examples to give is Google's algorithms are the fastest, and that is why Google continues to be at the forefront. So we have these 5 crore MSMEs, and in one of the slides I didn't mention it explicitly, but the top line mentioned many of our MSMEs do not want to expand. They do not want to scale, and I think taxation and fiscal authorities have a role to play in ensuring that scaling up takes place. Why from the campuses very few are emerging, and how are we going to tap this young literate population? I think we need to adopt out of the box thinking, and challenging the existing is the most important thing. Let me be honest with you. I teach here. I've had the opportunity as a postdoc to teach at Harvard and as a postdoc to teach at Stanford. And when I was doing my PhD in New South Wales, as a doctorate student, generally we are all research assistants to our professors. All of you, even in India, abroad. Do you get a chance to teach the classes your professor takes? The key difference that I found in students here in Australia and at Harvard and at Stanford. Here I can run through the class without a student raising his hand or questioning me. At the 3 places that I mentioned, 5 minutes into the class and that's over. Students will challenge you. Everything that you'll write on the board, they'll challenge you. They may agree, they may not agree, but they have some new thought that they'll bring in. Young minds, bright challenge. The culture that we have in our country, the Gurukul system that we have, the pattern that we have adopted, that if a student questions us, we think the student is being disrespectful. I remember very clearly at Sydney, the professor who was teaching me econometrics in our class for PhD told us, no question is unworthy if it has come to your mind. If you're sitting in my class and the question has come to your mind, it cannot be unworthy. And second thing he said, if you do not ask that question, you will not be attentive to rest of my class. You need to get it out of your mind. Either you should get a response which really makes you feel satisfied, or you should get a response which you know the professor is going to provide you a response today or tomorrow, during or after the class. I realized it, how correct he was. And therefore, this psychology, we as professors in our universities have to develop. Tell our students, when you question us, you question my knowledge, you are not questioning my authority, you are not undermining my knowledge, but you are contributing to my learning. I think we need to not only tell it, we need to adopt it ourselves. I'm sorry to mention, but this happens to me all the time when I have been abroad, studying there, participating with them. The urge to make profits, to excel, to monopolize is extremely there. Up here in our country, it is missing. Maybe it has something to do with our moral values, ethical values, maybe religious values, that we are always satisfied. We don't have the urge to monopolize. Risk taking, generally we do not encourage. We are very conservative. Inability to face failures, we don't teach that. And now here is a story. At Silicon Valley, where I spent about 18 months at Stanford, I spoke to the angel investors. What do you see in the potential candidate whom you fund? So obviously I thought they will tell me fire in the belly, the passion. And they told me, our first question is this your first venture? And if he says it's the first, we lose interest. If he says no, he has failed once, okay, we want to listen. If he says he has failed twice, he's the potential candidate. Failures teach you much more than what a success teaches you. And therefore, though we have been talking in our classes right from kindergarten, failures are pillar to success, We never tolerate a failure, neither in the family nor in our education system. I think that's missing. We need to teach that. Incubators, 110 incubators for a country with 1.2 billion population means it's a drop in the ocean. We need to think about mentors. Hardly this word mentor is in currency in our country. We need to think about it. So Stanford Silicon Valley phenomena is basically tolerating failure. So and I think Bangalore has a big role to play here, because I asked those Americans that if it is just a tolerance to failure, then how come the East Coast, which has Harvard, MIT, and all those institutions were not able to produce the Silicon Valley? Why did Stanford produce the Silicon Valley? And they said it's the weather. The weather of Silicon Valley is very conducive to work 12 months in a year, unlike East Coast, where 6 months you work and 6 months you tolerate blizzards. So what's the conclusion? I think if we have to absorb our young population, we have to be very clear as mentors, as teachers and professors, what strategy do we want to follow. All strategies are good. The Chinese strategy, which was previously a Japanese strategy, let America put all the money in research and development, buy one piece, replicate it, make your industries and produce in millions. So that's the replication strategy. The Chinese do it even now all the time. The other is the American strategy, R&D. Lots of research and development, encourage innovation. So we need to, both strategies are good, both will absorb our population, but I think we need to think of a strategy. I tell my students all the time, especially when Satya Nadella got the job that he got, and later on 2 or 3 more got it. I asked them a simple question. What is India's population? 1.2 billion. What's world population? 7 billion. Which is the best institution in our country? IIT. Which is the best IIM? Oh, we have 10 of them. IIM is one of them. Since when are we exporting the best brains of our country? IITians, IIMs. From 1971. How many would we have exported every year? About easily 10,000. 16% of the world population, 45 years of export of the best minds that this country has produced, and on Wall Street, 5,000 listed companies. You are welcome to count for me, of those 5,000 companies, how many are Indians? 16% of the world population, 45 years of export of the best IITians and IIMs, one Satya Nadella, one Nui Chawla. Welcome, challenge, count more than 12. You will stop at 6. So I tell my students, until 16% of Wall Street listed companies have Indian CEOs, I'm not celebrating. When it becomes 17%, I'll celebrate myself. That's where I think we need to think and bring the focus of our students. I strongly believe, shallow believe in luck, but strong believe in cause and effect, and success is never accidental. I showed you those 3 pictures in the beginning. Our identity is Indians. We can't change it. Wherever you go, your accent, your color, your size of the nose will betray you are an Indian. Let's be proud of it. Let's guard on it and let's improve it. Now I want to close with one statement. 2003 August. Let me repeat. 2003 August. Something had already happened in America. Right? You all know what must have happened? The Twin Towers. 2003 August, I was invited for a lunch with Professor Richard Cooper, who was advisor to President Nixon. Now, some of the young people here may not know who President Nixon is, but the ones in my age know that President Nixon was a very important person, a president of the US. Richard Cooper, and you can Google and see for yourself, has continued to be an advisor to all the presidents that followed after that. highly respected international economics professor. August 2003, he meets me for the first time, knowing that I work at the Reserve Bank, asked me to join him for lunch. And so we are having lunch at the Harvard Club. The only question he poses most of the time when I go abroad, the questions these professors used to pose me are, and 9/11 had just happened, most of the time the question they would pose me are you a Muslim? I said, no, I'm a Sikh. That's the standard question I have practiced over the years to answer. But Richard Cooper was not interested in mundane questions like this. He wanted to know from me why Americans respect Indians. It's a real life story. Richard Cooper is still alive. You can check with him. And I tried everything. I told him we are democratic, and we are tall, and we believe in freedom of speech, and we give women freedom of whatever they want. We had the Prime Minister who was a woman. Anything and everything that you can think of, I told him. Nothing cut ice. By the time we are on our desert, 45 minutes into lunch, he's repeatedly asking the same question. Charan, you haven't answered my question. Why do Americans respect Indians? So I thought maybe Richard Cooper is getting old. So I thought maybe palmistry. No. Numerology. No. Bharatnatyam. No. Yoga. No. Nothing is cutting ice. Told him, Richard, instead of quizzing me all this time, why don't you tell me yourself? What is that impresses you? Anybody want to take a guess in this audience? Yeah, I told that hardworking, loyal, faithful, dog-like, everything I said. We did that with the British, so I had no shyness in mentioning it. So I told that unity, diversity, everything. I spent 45 minutes. You see, every adjective that was there in the dictionary that came to my mind, I narrated it. Persistence, subsistence, poverty, living with it, happy, everything. Lack of values, emotions. I told him that over here, every street corner is a CVS shop for antidepressants. Right? And we have, over in India, every street corner has a photo of Jesus, Ram, Guru Nanak. I told him all that. Culture, dance, Bharatnatyam, I told you, Odissi, everything. I'm telling you, everything that an educated Indian like you and me can think of. Demography, right? Okay, let me close with this one word that he told me. And I want you to think about this word, and this word has lots of implications. He said, Pokhran. What is Pokhran? You had all the satellites on you, and you still did it because you had the urge to excel. And to translate that urge to excel, you had the strategy. So it was power and strategy. If you have to meet the demographic challenge, you need both of them. Thank you.
Very good afternoon. Sorry to intervene in between to all of you. Professor, you said at the beginning, someone has to question. And I am most ignorant person. I want to do that before you. You said that 11 million graduates are coming out from colleges every year. Out of it, 20% are employed and 80% are not employed. Whether these 11% employed include self-employment on one side, if so or if not so, what about out of 80% whether they go in for entrepreneurship or any other vocation other than simply going and employing themselves? What is happening? What is your take on that?
So the problem in our country is, and I'm very happy to interact over lunch with some of the colleagues here. The chairman of your institution, I understand, is a school dropout. Now, I'm getting worried. I've reached a stage where I can't be a school dropout. But I'm getting convinced that when you have the canvas in front of you, you tend to excel. When you have the security of your degrees on your shoulder, you tend to go on a single track, which I have. So these 80 odd percent who do not find job in the organized sector, they have to then operate in the unorganized sector. And that is where I think the focus has to be. Unfortunately, our focus is not there. I'm beginning to now realize, teaching in a management institution, that I'm producing managers for Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and McKinsey and Boston Consulting. I'm not creating, and which I want to create, Steve Jobs or people who create jobs. I'm creating people who manage jobs. And that is what is reflected, that my incubators do not get my own graduates, because I'm not creating entrepreneurs. So these people get absorbed in unorganized sector. And then the other thing I want to mention, and I'm beginning to now write on it regularly, I do not know how many of you have thought on those lines. Most of the Nobel Prizes that have come during the age, that have come on research that was done when the person was less than 30 years. Not all. Most of the Nobel Prizes, most means more than 50% of the Nobel Prizes, came on research which was done by the scholar before the age of 30 years. Now you tell me, in India, before the age of 30 years, what do our young people do? They quickly become postgraduates, MCom by the age of 22. Then the government allows them 8 or 6 chances of sitting in civil services, and all of them burn the midnight oil on preparing for civil services. 3 lakh students sit for civil services, 1,000 get absorbed. That was the time when they were most productive. That was the time when they were risk taking. That was the time when they could extend the envelope. During that time, they are reading only to prepare for IAS. The most productive time has been grossly wasted in just trying to get a civil job. If just imagine that young mind with all that energy and enthusiasm was trying to build a Google or an Apple, I think Googles and Apples would have multiplied. That's not happening. So that is the tragedy that I think we need to address and somehow tell that job is assured for you, the ones who want to join a job. We'll do a selection, if not civil services, defense, if not defense, probably others. But here is a list of jobs. But what we want from you is entrepreneurship. Start a job, employ others, or at least employ yourself. So that is not happening. And I wish that we start thinking in terms of telling our young students that don't waste your time in dream. And what do these civil servants finally do? Many of them pick up a job in the World Bank, in the IMF. The moment they get a chance to go out, they go out and then they never come back. Most of the World Bank, IMF employees today are civil servants, IAS officers from Indian government. So I think that doesn't satisfy them after working for 5 years. After first preparing for 5 years and getting into that job, then working there for 5 years, they're totally disillusioned. They think we came for something else, that's not what we are getting. And then they either go and join international agencies, or then somewhere dissatisfied continue to serve. So I would like that segment to develop now, where they take up the challenge on their own and produce research which is equivalent to what Apple or Google did.
So you raised 2 points. You said there is innovation and there's replication. Innovations happen when you ask questions. Replication happens when you just copy. To do innovation, you have to ask good questions, for which I think you need to take a risk. So is risk-taking left to a country which is full of immigrants. They've taken the risk to go to that country, and therefore they furthered the risk further. The other countries like China and Japan are homogeneous. They are like us, we don't ask enough questions, and therefore they're left to replication.
So, while you have taken a risk by asking a question, I can take a risk by giving an ignorant answer. You forgive me for that, but I'll think aloud with you.
Sure, sir.
Am I not an immigrant in your country?
Are you?
I neither know Karnataka language, Kannada, nor do I know the culture. When I sit and watch and talk in Hindi, people stare at me and say, what's wrong with me? Many times the Chief Minister says, why don't I learn Kannada? All your buses have, right? So the point I am making is, when you compare with China and Japan, and you use the word immigrant, that somehow doesn't work. They are one language, one culture. We are a country, highly diverse, we are still one country. So therefore, when I come here, I find my own challenges and I'm able to innovate. I'm able to survive. Look, I don't know how many of you here are from Kerala and know Malayalam, but I studied and stayed in Kerala for 2 years and I survived with one single sentence. Long time ago, when Bollywood was still not there, I learned one sentence, Eniki Malayalam Arilla, which means I don't know Malayalam. And I survived for 2 years. And everybody was more helpful than they would have been if I knew Malayalam. So the point I'm trying to make is that these two examples which you took, China and Japan, are a very homogeneous culture, homogeneous language, homogeneous country, whereas we are a highly diverse country. If you look at the languages we have, the cultures, the food habits, the dressing pattern, the hairstyles are so different. So that just doesn't help. So to me, if the immigration population in America can be innovative, and it's only if that quality is only ascribed to being an immigration, then in our own country we are so diversified. Immigration means diversified population. So in our own country we are highly diversified in all aspects, even education. See, when I was studying for long years in Gujarat. When I landed up straight from Gujarat to Pathankot in Punjab, the standards were massively different and I had to survive somehow. So I don't think that's an accurate example, and I don't think immigration is one which drives innovation. Survival, yes. Challenges, yes. So challenges are what is really needed. And that is lacking.
I thought you answered my question. The Gujaratis and Keralites, when they go elsewhere, they innovate, they do extremely well, they do very badly in their own state. Gujarati similarly. So I hold to the view that the moment you take a risk and go out of your comfort zone in our own country, you are the innovators in that particular state.
Totally agree with you. So what you are saying is risk-taking and challenging situations bring out the best out of you. Look, many times I get this, my students write to me or when I go for lectures, and I'm not prompting you to do the same, but many times they tell me, Professor, this was the best lecture we had, right? And I always tell them, this was the best class I had. Because you can only excel when you're constantly challenged. If the students are silent, and I always tell my students, I have learned many things, but I have never learned to interpret silence. I tell that to my wife too, right? I can never interpret silence. If you keep challenging me, I'll keep excelling because I have to survive. So what brings in innovation is a challenge. Let me give you one example. You can Google and see it for yourself. So the scientists conducted an experiment on 2 sets of fishes. They picked up the fishes from the ocean and then they put them in different boxes. One box was always overfed. The food was always lying there, fishes want to eat, don't want to eat, let it rot. The other box, they would always drop little food and fishes would fight for it, and knowing that there are so many fishes, at least that this much food is required, they would not supply adequate quantity. These fishes were always on minimum food very, very physically fit, almost starving, like Gandhiji, right? Thin and lean, and here is you have all the fat fishes. And soon what did they find? The fat fishes became sick and they lost interest. In modern language, they were depressed. And those other fishes were active, agile, and always competitive. The challenge. So I think what matters in innovation is the challenge. If you do not have the challenge, you have also put it very well, once you're out of the comfort zone. I think that's what matters. See, what does an entrepreneur survive for? Profits, opportunities. And his old products are Schumpeterian theory is exactly this. There's a constant destruction taking place. Let that destruction take place. So when I asked the Americans that, look, if there was a Lehman Brothers in India, you would have condemned us to have supported it. Before Lehman Brothers, they saved many other institutions, right? But when it came to Lehman and others, why did you support it? You should have, according to the capitalist theory, they should have gone the way that they chose to. Why should be risks taken at the cost of the national exchequer? So I think that is how you have to, as a policymaker, all to survive, provide opportunities, let competition prevail, let challenges come up, face the challenges. Right.
I think we should not forget to thank such a wonderful speaker who has obliged our invitation and taken time off from the kind of work that he does, which has international impact. So on that note, I'm going to request Dr. B.A. Vasu, Director, School of Commerce Studies, to kindly hand over a memento from our end as a token of our love with appreciation and respect. So we look forward to many more such associations in the future as well, and we extremely, extremely thank you for being here today for this special address.